it's a real honor and privilege to be in front of you here, and I know I should have been here about a year ago, not here, but presenting a year ago, but planes didn't allow me to come, and I'm really pleased to be here today. So, as I guess Margaret has said, well, I work for the International Lymphedema Framework, and I will try to get you through the history of the International Lymphedema Framework and how it all started. Then we will have a short quiz. I will have a short quiz for you, and then we will go through the concept of National Lymphedema Frameworks. Now, the ILF could be summarized in a few key dates, and I will explain each of them. In 2002, in the UK, was launched what was called then the UK Lymphedema Framework. And it was launched by a few highly dedicated and visionary people who were called Christine Moffat. I'm sure you might have heard her name before. Peter Mortimer, who's also present at the conference here, who are highly dedicated individuals and lymphedema specialists. The third person to be involved in this project was Caroline Badger, who was the chair of the British Lymphology Society, representing the British practitioners. And last but not least, Anita Wallace, who is the chair of the Lymphedema Support Network, which is the national patients organization. And these four individuals, plus obviously a few others, had to come to the conclusion that the management of lymphedema in the UK wasn't satisfactory. First of all, and I'll have to make a long story short, but first of all, they realized with study that lymphedema was much more common than everybody thought. And they also realized that something needed to be done. And their vision was to put around the same table the practitioners, so the members of the Lymphology Society, the patients, and industry. And to say, let's sit down together. We each have different interests. We each have different vision of the management of lymphedema in the UK. But we need to sit down together, to work together, to define the best way to manage lymphedema within the UK healthcare system. For 3 years, and sorry, I don't know if I think Margareta mentioned that, but at that time I was involved in the project from an industry point of view because I was working for industry then. During 3 years we had quite a few meetings, and believe me, getting all these people to work together wasn't necessarily the easiest things of all, but we managed to do some work and to put some work together, which led to the publication of the best practice document, best practice for the management of lymphedema document, which is here presented in its English version and was later translated into Japanese. Now, that document is interesting because it is called best practice, and it is presented as a consensus document. The only trouble is that it is very, very difficult to have the magic word of evidence in terms of managing lymphedema. So the approach that was used by Christine and the team was to say, when there is evidence, then let's put it in that document. But when there is no evidence that you should do this or that this way, let's get specialists from around the world to agree on what is best practice without necessarily the evidence. And that's the document came out from this process. And it was a very, very long and serious and thorough process. With that document, the UK framework went to the health authorities and say, look, this is what we have done. This is the group representing the practitioners, the patients, and the industry. And these are our recommendations. This is how lymphedema should be managed in the UK. And really, to our surprise, the health authorities just said, yes, you're right. We were expecting to have a long fight with them to get them to change their mind. But they actually said, yes, you're right. What you're recommending is what has to be done. And very quickly, they then changed the way lymphedema was managed in the UK. The big problem in the UK was that you had some kind of a funnel, and all patients had to go through lymphedema specialists in clinics across the UK. You have, I don't know the exact number, but let's say about 150 to 100 of these clinics with lymphedema specialists. The trouble is that these, let's say, 400 people working in these 200 centers, just to make things simple, had to deal with thousands and thousands and thousands of patients. Even some patients that didn't need specialist treatment. What had to be done, and the recommendations from the UK framework, were to say, the patient who don't need specialist care have access to treatment in primary care with a prescription from their GP and going to a pharmacy to get their garment. That led to the creation of a lymphedema category onto the drug tariff in the UK. That means patients had a much easier access to the garments, to the compression garments, which was obviously the objective of the project and the best outcome possible. But it also meant the specialist nurses, because it's nurses in the UK mostly, had a much better working condition and could focus on their specialist tasks, so taking care of the patients who really needed their specialist knowledge. It wasn't an objective, but a consequence. It gave business opportunities for industry, and it was, in a way, a very positive outcome because it showed industry that when they did something together with the patients and the practitioners, they could get an increase in business. And a year later, the Wandsworth study, which Wandsworth is in an area south of London, showed the following result: that first of all, lymphedema is a common healthcare problem, that care provision is inadequate and complications are common, but more importantly, that the cost of managing lymphedema, the average cost per patient, could be divided by 2.5. Could go from £28,000 to £12,600. So it's not a win-win situation, it's a win-win-win-win situation where the patients win, the practitioners win, industry wins, and the healthcare authorities win because they're saving money. Now, I'm not saying the situation in the UK is perfect. Don't imagine for a second that it is perfect. It's far from being perfect because this is a pilot study. And it's not happening everywhere in the UK, unfortunately. This, for example, is a very positive outcome, but it created potentially other problems, which was, do the people who deliver the garment know what they are doing? And all these kind of things need now to be addressed. But somehow the outcomes of the UK framework were very, very positive. And that created a lot of international interest because a lot of people said, well, hang on a second, in my country, whether it's Sweden, France, Italy, Japan or US, I think management of lymphedema is not appropriate or could be improved. Why can't I do that in my country? And that's how the ILF was born, because we realized that what had been done in the UK could be transferred into other countries. It's not cut and paste, because the problems in each country are different. But the methodology of putting the stakeholders around the same table, of working together to build strong recommendations to the health authorities could be successful. So we had our, then that led us to our first conference in 2009 in Ascot in the UK in April. And it was organized by a professional company. We had 440 delegates, 250 of them being from the UK, and 77 from 17 different countries. So already we could see that we could have an interesting international conference. The only one of the big problems was that we didn't necessarily share the vision and the values of the conference organizers. So in 2009, we also decided to establish ILF as a UK charity, because it had always been the vision is to have an organization that was not for profit. Somehow, to my knowledge, very few people got rich from lymphedema. Some might, but I'm not sure you call that rich anyway. But really the vision was to say, let's have a not-for-profit organization doing what we see as necessary. The chair of the ILF is with Christine Moffat, obviously. Those are in 2009, where Anita Wallace, who was heavily involved in the creation of the UK framework, Margaret Snedden from the UK, Cheryl Pike from the UK, Deborah Doherty from the UK, and Vaughan Keeley, whom you all know by now, also from the UK. And that's when I started working with ILF.